In the first chapter of this text, we will talk about taking risks and making profits within the dynamic business environment. A dynamic business environment simply means a business environment that changes rapidly. The learning objectives for this chapter is 1, to describe the relationship between profit and risk and show how businesses and nonprofit organizations can raise the standard of living for all. Explain how entrepreneurship and the other factors of production contribute to the creation of wealth. 3, analyze the effects of economic environment and taxes on business. And 4, describe the effects of technology on businesses. The fifth learning objective is to demonstrate how businesses can meet and beat their competition. You'll also be learning how to analyze the effect of social change on businesses. You'll be able to identify what businesses need to do in order to meet the global challenges like war and terrorism. And then finally, you'll review how past trends are being repeated in the present and what those trends mean for college graduates going forward. Success in business depends on consistently adapting to changes in the market. A business is an activity that seeks to provide goods and services to others while operating at a profit. To earn that profit, you provide desired goods, jobs, and services to people and other businesses. Goods are a tangible product. Tangible basically means something you can hold in your hand, like an iPhone, like computers, food, clothing. A service that a business might offer is something that's intangible, something you can't physically hold in your hand. And that would be something like a service that might repair your iPhone once you crack the screen. Continuing on with the definition of a business, its job is to fulfill the needs of its markets, also known as providing a service or product that is wanted or needed from its consumers. When a business is started, it typically starts small with a person that has an idea of a business or product and risks their own time and money to start and manage that business. In the US, an entrepreneur is held in very high regard because of the time and the risk of their money that they put into the business. Most of you have probably shopped at Walmart. Although you only know Walmart as a nationwide company that sells goods at a discounted price, what you don't know is that Sam Walton started Walmart with just one store in Arkansas in the 1960s. After more than 60 years, there are almost 5,000 Walmarts located throughout the United States. And this doesn't count the Sam's Club stores or the distribution centers and such. Building a business isn't easy. It all starts with an entrepreneur like Sam Walmart that risked his time and money to pursue his dream. A quick knowledge check if you've read the materials already. Out of items A through D, which one refers to the total of money a business takes in during a given period? I'll give you a couple seconds to think about it. All right. If your answer was C, revenue, you are correct. In the next slide, we'll talk more about revenue. When thinking about wealth building in businesses, in order to be successful, you must have revenue in order for a business to survive. Revenue is simply put as the amount of money that a business takes in for their goods or services that are being sold in a given time period. The next thing that's really important is that the company shows a profit for their goods and services that they are providing to their consumers. After all, this is normally the reason we go into business in the first place, is to make a profit. A profit is the amount of money a business earns after it pays all its bills, like salaries, rent, taxes, etc. And lastly, a business should avoid losses in order to stay in business. A loss occurs when the business expenses are more than the revenue or cash they're bringing in a specific time period. If a business consistently loses money, they could end up closing their doors. And according to the text, over 175,000 businesses a year in the United States close because sometimes losses beyond their control and other times just from bad decision making. So it's important to consider that because a business environment is dynamic or constantly changing, it's important to stay up on the needs of your consumers so that your products and services are relevant and are competitive. We talked earlier about an entrepreneur and how he or she risks their time and money in order to open a business. Now let's talk about matching risk with profit. Risk is the time and money that the entrepreneur puts in order to start the business. Even though not all business enterprises make the same profits, they do take on risks. The bigger the risk, and even if everything's planned right and it works out, it can come with a big return. However, it's important to always be aware of the market and how the needs of the consumer change from time to time and how the business adjusts and responds to those changes in order to be successful and get that big payoff. The other day, I had a lunch with the owner of the company I work for, and he told me, too often people get hung up on the idea of being the next Elon Musk or the next Steve Jobs and how they rose to success. What some people don't realize is the risks and hard work and failures it took in order to get to that level of success that those people realized in their careers. With risk, you must have perseverance in order to have the drive to keep trying and eventually succeeding. If you heard the quote from Erin Andrews, "Success doesn't happen overnight," this aligns with the owner of my company's thoughts about building a successful business. If you fail once and then give up, you never know what could happen if you kept persevering. You could be the next Sam Walmart or Elon Musk. So always keep that in mind about businesses. A good example of risk and reward is the Scrub Daddy. When the entrepreneur that developed Scrub Daddy, Aaron Krause, couldn't find buyers at local body shops for his product, he tossed it in a box, labeled it scrap, and just threw it in the corner to forget about it. A few years later, Krause found it and used it to clean some patio furniture and discovered how well it worked in order to clean up lounge chairs and his dirty dishes. So he redesigned it, made it a smiling face, made it more appealing, ended up on Shark Tank because he was looking for that sales boost, and that's what he got. He got more recognition from just being on Shark Tank, but then also it was one of the most successful products that appeared on Shark Tanks. So that's just an example of what risk and rewards did for the Scrub Daddy and for Krause when he started his business. All right, let's talk about the standard of living and the quality of life that businesses bring to society. The wealth business generates and the taxes they pay help everyone in their communities. A nation's businesses are a part of an economic system that contributes to the standard of living and quality of life for everyone in the country. The standard of living is really the amounts of goods and services people can buy with the money that they have. So that's the standard. In the US, as it says on the slide, they are one of the highest standards of living in the world. In other countries, workers might make more money, but their prices for products are higher. So for instance, in Japan, workers might make more than Americans, but in Japan, a bottle of beer might cost $6 or $7 to where a bottle of beer in the United States might be $2 or $3. So that's just an example of the differences in standard of living in different countries. The quality of life refers to the general well-being of society in terms of political freedom, natural environment, education, healthcare, safety, the amount of leisure and rewards that add to the satisfaction of the goods and services that are provided. So keep in mind, high quality of life requires a combined effort of businesses, nonprofits, and government agencies that provide services to all. The more money businesses create, the more is available to improve the quality of life of all of the country's citizens. In order for a business to be successful, they must cater to the needs of their stakeholders. A stakeholder is all the people that really stand to gain or possibly lose from the activities of a business. So it's important to know who those stakeholders are. They include customers, employees, stockholders, suppliers, dealers, bankers, and the list goes on. Anyone that could potentially gain or lose falls into that category. A primary challenge really for every business is to be able to respond to the needs of those stakeholders. For example, the needs for the business to make profits may be balanced against employees to earn sufficient income in order to be able to have a standard of living. As seen in the circle of stakeholders, the profit and loss of a company affects so many different people. For example, some argue that the main goal of a company is to make a profit so their stockholders are happy and they receive a return on their investment. Oftentimes, stockholders don't realize how decisions that they're demanding of the business snowball into problems or really big problems, which cause them even less profit. Since wages are typically a company's biggest expense, it seems like stockholders typically think it's an easy target to make changes. But sometimes what they don't consider is how cutting wages might affect the overall success of that company. For example, if the stockholders did succeed in getting the business to cut wages of an employee that had been there for 10 years, it's likely that that person would leave the company to look for a job making either the same or more money that he was making. Although some might say just hire someone else, there's a lot of expenses with hiring new people. There's the cost of training, which some say it can be as much as an annual salary of the person you're hiring. It just really depends on the business. Therefore, it's really important to consider all of the stakeholders and how changes might affect them all before really putting them in force. When thinking more about business stakeholders, let's talk about how a company might outsource some of its work to other companies in order to gain efficiencies with production in order to see a better profit. Outsourcing is the contracting that companies do with other businesses to complete some of the firm's functions. In today's age, other companies are likely to be in other countries like China, Taiwan, or Singapore. Or on the flip side of that, a Japanese automaker may outsource some of the assembly of its products to the US or Germany. An example is Dell Computers and other companies outsource support services or call centers to India and Asian nations. The idea of outsourcing businesses from the US to Asian countries may not seem like a big deal. However, to many people in the US, when all of the outsourcing began, it was very upsetting simply because citizens were losing their jobs. So when you think about outsourcing to other nations, even though it's helping them with their, just being able to survive, it also takes away from those citizens here. So just a lot of different things that all the stakeholders needs that need to be considered. And another thing to note is not all companies outsource their work outside of the U.S. Sometimes a company within the U.S. Might be located in Detroit, but may outsource some of their assembly to their parts for their manufacturing to a plant in Montgomery, Alabama. So that's just different thoughts on how outsourcing might occur. Despite the efforts of businesses to make sure that they're satisfying the needs of stakeholders, they can't meet the needs of everything in the community, like public schools, civics associations, and other nonprofits that are really there that devote their social causes to make sure that the welfare of society is met. A nonprofit organization is an organization whose goals do not include making a personal profit for its owners or organizers. Nonprofit organizations often do strive for financial gains, but they use them to meet those social or educational needs rather than that personal profit. Although you may have interests in a nonprofit, you still need to understand how business works, like, by taking this course. It's important, even with a nonprofit, that you have skills like information management, leadership, marketing, and financial management in order to be successful in a career, whether it's for a nonprofit or a for-profit business. The relationship between profit and risk is basically the bigger the risk, the bigger profit, like we were talking about, or the bigger reward. The contributions of business and nonprofit organizations can raise the standard of living. More money a business creates, the more potential availability to improve the quality of life for everyone. The goal of business leaders is to try and recognize and respond to the needs of all of its stakeholders while still making a profit. As we discussed, the goal of a nonprofit is to handle the social and educational initiatives that are nonprofit oriented, like the Red Cross does in the example on the slides. A nonprofit organization has a tough time attracting employees and getting them to stay. For one of the biggest reasons is nonprofits normally can't offer the higher salaries that a for-profit company offers. So they have to find other ways to recruit, hire, and retain their workers. So one of the ways that a nonprofit could be successful in recruiting and retaining workers is to be clear about the goals of the nonprofit, really try to sell to the potential hire who they're going to be serving, and know that you need to invest in those employees because the work is so hard. And oftentimes as a nonprofit organization, their employees do get overworked because they don't have as much extra funds in order to hire new people. I mean, I guess I can speak from my own experience. I worked and went to school at the University of Cincinnati, which is a state institution, but also a nonprofit. I made really good money there. However, I was recruited out by a for-profit company that increased my salary by more than 30%. So at the time, I was a lot younger and money talks. So I did leave. There were a couple of times where the university did try to recruit me back, but the problem is, once you've left and you are used to the better benefits, better salary, it is hard to go back and relinquish that, even if it is for a cause that you believe in. So you really have to get employees invested in those causes in order for them not to leave. When studying for your tests or quizzes, this slide gives you an idea of what you need to look at and be knowledgeable of in order to be successful on your tests. So I'll give you a few seconds so you can read over the slide and take notes or think about what you might need to study within the text. There are two ways to succeed in business. One is really to work for a large company and climb the corporate ladder and let that entrepreneur really take on all the risks from owning a company and paying you benefits, vacation time, health insurance. It's always an option. The riskier path is really to become an entrepreneur, because then you assume all that risk, making sure that you have enough money to pay your bills, to pay your employees. The text has a really good analogy of why it's so exciting to be an entrepreneur, talking about the national anthem, the Star Spangled Banner. It says the United States is the land of the free and the home of the brave. And part of being free is having that ability to own your own business and reap the rewards of owning your own business by taking on the profit. But it's just a lot of risk. So, and it's a lot of stress. So make sure that, if taking that risk is what you love, go for it. If you prefer to let somebody else have that risk, then work for a larger company or even a small business, as long as you're not taking on that responsibility. So there's a lot of research you can do about being an entrepreneur, but there's this slide talks a little bit about some of those pros and cons, but it's by no means all of the pros and cons of being an entrepreneur. So just, take a look at it and think about it. The importance of entrepreneurs is really to create wealth for its citizens. A country requires more than natural resources. It needs the efforts of entrepreneurs and the skills and knowledge they produce by selling goods or services. So one thing that the text really stresses is to think about how the government can support entrepreneurship and spread the knowledge. For me, the way that I've seen the government support entrepreneurship is by contracting with small businesses to do work, offering government-backed small business loans with low interest rates, teaching entrepreneurs how to manage a business. Recently, a way that the government helped entrepreneurs was during the COVID pandemic, when they offered small business loans called the PPP loan, that for many businesses was forgiven if they met certain criteria. If you're interested in starting a business, take a look at the Small Business Administration's website to see what kind of resources are available to help an entrepreneur get started. A lot of times, if you are looking to get a small business loan, there's certain criteria that you have to meet, like, for instance, having a business plan, which we'll talk more about in this class. So this is a pretty interesting slide about women in the workforce. It's a bar graph that compares women in the workforce between 1970 and 2020. In 1970, 35% of women were in the workforce, versus 2020, they were 50%. Women that were college grads in 1970 was 36% of women, to where 2020 it was 54%. And this is an even more interesting slide, that women earning more than their husband in 1970 was at 4% versus 2020 at 23%. Women's contribution to the household expenses in 1970 was 27% versus 2020 at 36%. In the past 50 years, the number of working women has obviously increased quite a bit. However, with the recent pandemic, we've seen that potentially decline again. A considerable number of even out earn their husband, something that seemed unheard of in the past. In 1970, there were zilch CEOs in Fortune 500 companies. In 2019, there were 33, which was a record high at the time. So just a lot of things to consider, whether you're male or female in the workplace, on how things have changed in more than the last, 30 years. Have you ever wondered why some countries are relatively wealthy and others are poor? Economists have been studying this issue of wealth creation for many years. And what they've done is develop the 5 factors of production that creates wealth. That would be land or natural resources, labor, workers, capital, entrepreneurship, and knowledge. But what really makes the rich countries today is entrepreneurship and knowledge. What we find when we compare the factors of production in rich and poor countries, some countries are poor, have plenty of land and natural resources. And a really relevant example out of the text is Russia. Russia has lots of land with many resources of timber and oil, but it's still not considered a rich country. It's a very poor country, especially with all of the turmoil going on over there right now. Most poorer countries, such as Mexico, have a lot of laborers, but not a lot of wealth. So since there are so many laborers, they need to find work, and they really rely on entrepreneurs to provide those jobs in order to create a contribution into society for wealth as they can. The business environment either encourages or discourages entrepreneurship. That helps explain why some states and cities in the U.S. grow rich while others remain relatively poor. This slide is a really good visualization of the 5 factors of production, but keep in mind, like we talked in the last slide, that just because you have land doesn't mean that you're a rich country, or just because you have laborers doesn't mean that you can contribute to the wealth of the country, because if there's no jobs, laborers don't really matter. So just keep an eye on this and think about it when you're prepping for your test. When prepping for the test, be sure to consider the questions on the slide as well as reading the text. What are some of the advantages of working for others? And for me, working for others, someone else is assuming the entrepreneurial risk and providing you with benefits like health insurance, vacation time, and a paycheck to put food on the table. So they really take care of the quality of life and standards of life that we talked about earlier. What benefits do you lose by being an entrepreneur, and what do you gain? As an entrepreneur, you have the freedom to make your own decisions and potentially for creating wealth while sacrificing the benefits that you might get for working with others, maybe better benefits, more pay. So just a few things to think about. What are the 5 factors of production, and which ones seem to be the most important for creating wealth? So the 5 factors of production, remember the slide, the previous slide, the visual that you see there. So those are land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship, and knowledge. And of these, entrepreneurship and knowledge seem to be the most important for creating wealth. The business environment consists of surrounding factors that either help or hinder the development of businesses. On the slide, it lists the 5 elements: economic and legal environment, technological environment, competitive environment, social environment, and global business environment. This slide is pretty interesting because it describes the 4 major elements that impact the dynamic business environment. And remember, dynamic business environment means that the environment is constantly changing. So the major elements are the economical and legal environment, which consists of freedom of ownership, contract laws, elimination of corruption, tradable currency, and minimum tax and regulation. Technological environment, including information technology, databases, barcodes, and the internet. The social environment, including diversity, demographic changes, family changes. And then finally, the competitive environment, which includes customer service, stakeholder recognition, employee service, and concern for the environment. When thinking about the economic and legal environment of a business, governments can promote entrepreneurship by allowing for private business ownership. In some countries, they don't allow for private ownership. All businesses or any discoveries are property of the government. So in the United States, we have that benefit of being able to own your own business and be an entrepreneur. Also, minimizing interference with free exchange of goods and services. Passing laws that enable business people to write enforceable contracts. So that way, if somebody defaults on a contract, they can take them to court and get, what they owe from somebody that defaulted on that contract. Establishing a currency that's tradable in world markets. Just a side note, I mean, right now, the US currency is very strong, which makes it valuable in Europe or Asia. So, especially right now, as the interest rates rise, we see our US dollar increase. Another thing that the economic and legal environment promotes is minimizing corruption. So that way everybody gets a fair chance of being successful in their business. This slide is another example of differences between countries to where, people in the US have the freedom to own their own business. But there's lots of resources out there for people to start businesses. But if you're trying to start a business in India, it's a little more difficult. For example, it takes time consuming and bureaucratic process to obtain government permission to start your own business. So if we think about that, what do you think the state of India would be with over 1 billion people if people had more freedom to start their own business? The quick answer to that is really just creating more wealth for people to have money to meet the standards of life. And so think about that. I mean, with over 1 billion people in a country where people are so poor, what kind of opportunity they could have if their government gave them a little bit more freedom. All right, continuing on with the business environment is the technological environment. I'm sure many are aware technology is really anything from phones to computers, software, and make businesses more effective and efficient and productive. For me, the company I work for has grown quite a bit in the last 12 years that I've been at. We started with very basic softwares that are for small businesses. When I started at the company, there were 67 people. We used a small software package. Within 5 years, we more than doubled our size. We grew globally. But some of the processes and procedures we had in place worked well when we were a small company. But as we grew, it took a lot of time to be productive. So what technology did for us was allow us to take a report that took 12 hours, about a day and a half to complete, and basically turn it into an automatic report that generates every month on the 10th of the month. And it takes less than 10 seconds to send that report out. So that's just an example of how technology has made some of our processes more effective, efficient, and productive in order to, save time for people that could invest their time in things that really warrant more time, like analysis of the reports to make sure that we're getting what we need in order to get the business running smoothly, really for long-term, success of the company. As important as technology is to business, the growth of e-commerce is buying and selling of goods online. There are two major types of e-commerce. There's the business to consumer, the B2C, or the business to business is B2B. So say that like 4 times really fast. As important as it is for the internet to be online for retailers in the consumer market, it has become even more important with the business to business market, where businesses sell goods and services. An example of that might be Amazon, where they sell So businesses get on Amazon, use them as a vendor to sell to other businesses. Another example that's outlined in the book is IBM selling their consulting services to a local bank. It might be a smaller bank that can't afford to have an IT staff. Or even if we think about Cincinnati Bell here locally, I think it's recently changed their names. At the company I work for, we hire contractors that have experience in programming or database administration, and we bring them in as a contractor. And oftentimes, once that contract is up, we have the ability to hire them on full time. So it gives us a resource in order to keep, our business running. Technology can help businesses respond to customers' needs in many ways. For example, there's a barcode on the products that you buy at a department store or a grocery store. Once you go to checkout to pay, that barcode is scanned and stored in a database that is identified by your personal shopping cart if you have one. With this information, the stores can personalize advertisements and entice you to come back into their store to buy more goods. For example, when I go to Kroger's and I buy eggs, milk, cheese, and some cereal, say Lucky Charms, I often get coupons that are for those specific items. And basically, it's just a marketing ploy to get people back into the store to not only buy the items that are in the coupon, but also other items as well. Even though collecting this information is legitimate and for a business to collect the data, and storing the data can sometimes come with the risk of identity theft. Identity theft occurs when people steal personal information of another person, like a social security number, credit cards, driver's license, etc., and uses them illegally. In an earlier slide, we described the breach at Equifax. Equifax is a credit bureau that keeps personal information from millions of people in the United States. In 2017, hackers proved that they were not safe. More than 147 million people's personal information was breached or stolen. Equifax ended up settling and agreed to spend up to $425 billion to help those affected. And I was one of those people affected. And a lot of times that $425 billion might seem a lot, but I think the benefit that I received was maybe $150. So it wasn't like that could repair all the items that the information they breached of mine could have caused. Experts say to avoid a breach, ensure that you use different passwords for each account that you log into. And when you're creating your passwords, typically using 13 random characters or more for your password makes it harder for hackers to crack your password. Another example on how technology can be used for business to cater to their customers is Disney. Disney introduced the My Magic Plus that allowed guests to create the ideal vacation. Used with their Magic Band, it allowed Disney and the customer to connect vacation choices that the guests made online. Also, the band's technology could be used as a park ticket, a hotel key, and an access pass to the Fast Pass. The customers could even purchase items and charge up to their hotel room account, like stuffed animals or lunch, anything, they might want to buy while they're in the park. The creation of the My Magic Plus allowed Disney's customers to do everything they needed in a very convenient way. The idea of it is an all-in-one, or it being effortlessly connected. It also allows the organization to try to advertise to customers with future business by collecting all that data of the preferences of the users. It's pretty interesting the kind of things that a company can do with a database full of information. Competition to exceed customer expectations in every industry has never been greater. Customers are always looking for the best quality at the lowest prices, all while receiving the best customer service. However, even providing that best of what the company perceives that its customers want isn't enough anymore to stay on top. Since businesses' focus is customer driven, compared to the past being manager driven, it's caused the need for companies to give their frontline employees empowerment, allowing for them to respond to customers a lot quicker. This means workers are focusing on the customer's needs allows the company to adjust its service or product to meet that demand. Ways that help a company transition to a customer-driven organization is by using what they call empowerment tools, giving workers more responsibility or authority to make decisions, freedom, training, and then the needed equipment to do the job. Now to another polling question. With your recent job or a recent responsibility that you've provided for either maybe your school or a job, based on the definition of empowerment on the last slide, do you think that your organization has become a more customer-driven organization by giving you empowerment? Just something to think about and decide if your organization is really doing everything they can to be more customer-centric and provide to the needs of the customer. It has become very important for businesses to consider the social environment as a part of their strategy. And it's not really just about strategy, it's really about just doing the right thing. When we think about the social environment, demography is important. Demography is the statistical study of human population with regard to the size, density, and other characteristics like age, race, gender, and income. Managing diversity is more than just making sure that we recruit minority races or female workers. Other demographics that should be considered are like culture, religious beliefs, sexual orientation, different types of personalities, family, people with disabilities, etc. This slide shows the demography of the U.S. by age. As you can see in this slide, it shows 70% of the population is older than 24 years old. How do you think that aging population is going to impact businesses? Businesses will need to re-examine their approach on marketing and human resources in order to meet the challenges facing them. While some businesses will fail, other businesses will emerge, creating new opportunities. In this slide, it shows the current demography of the U.S. based on races on the list. As a side note, all of these percentages don't add up to 100 since some participants may identify in different races. This is an interesting slide. It's a projection of the demography of the U.S. by race in 2060. Legal and illegal immigrants have made a dramatic effect on many states. Many local services like healthcare and education are really trying to make efforts to adapt to these changes. Some of these changes include changing signs, brochures, and then websites as well. Think about your high school or your college or even the city that you live in and what you may have noticed. Something that I've noticed and I've been out of high school for quite a while, but what I notice is now there are teachers in the school that teach English to people that don't know how to speak English. So it's just interesting on how organizations are trying to adapt to the changing landscape of the demography of race. As seen on this slide, back in 2020, people around the world joined a protest against institutionalized racism and police violence. The movement really placed a renewed focus on racial bias in many areas of life, including businesses. So with this in mind, what can companies do to create a diverse and inclusive workplace? Think about it. Things that I've thought of that I see in my place of employment where they have become more diverse and inclusive. They started by educating employees on other cultures or forms of racism. Also, listening to the needs of employees, sending out surveys to see what constitutes employee satisfaction. Celebrate employee differences, embrace change. One way the company I work for does this is by spotlighting different employees and telling about their past and what their aspirations are, not just in business, but personally. And it allows other people to get to know them and realize the commonalities they have with other people, even though they might be from different cultures or different race. They have the same interests. So just something to think about. Diversity is defined by the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, prohibiting laws discriminating against age, disability, genetic information, national origin, pregnancy, race, religion, or sex. When discussing how demographic changes experienced in the country over the past 30 years have affected businesses, it often helps to use the grocery store as an example. The grocery store has evolved from a market selling primarily raw materials to produce a meal into stores that now serve pre-made products that simply just involve heating and eating. It's about the convenience. Why? Some would argue this change has more to do with the two-income and single-parent households than any other environmental factor. Prior to this, the marketing, as I said earlier, was about raw materials because it used to be that the father worked and the mother stayed home and she prepared fresh meals every evening. Another interesting slide talking about the diversity in age. So diversity is more than just ethnic and racial diversity. It's also in terms of age, which means sometimes managers or just coworkers have to adapt to different generations within the workplace. Think about some of the challenges of working with someone that's much older and younger. So for me, I'm 50 years old, and we just recently recruited 3 or 4 new accountants into the finance department right out of college, ready to go, eager to learn. And I was teaching one of the accountants how to make a journal entry to move an expense from one department to another. And when I was describing how I was taught with debits and credits, I was taught on paper. This employee was all taught using software products. So even though teaching somebody on paper how to make journal entries sounds really, really old, it's just a total difference. So sometimes you have to adjust the way that you explain things to different generations, and then vice versa. When you're a younger person in the workplace and you're dealing, say, in your early 20s, and you're dealing with somebody that might be in their 50s, and you start talking about all the different social media platforms, although I understand them, some people won't understand what they are. So you'll have to explain them and explain the meaning, sometimes in order to get your point across. Let's talk about who's going to support Social Security in the future and what it looked like in 1950 and the number of workers per retiree through what we expect it to look like in 2040. The vertical axis plots the number from 0 to 8 in increments of 1. The horizontal axis plots the years from 1950 to 2040 in increments of 10. The graph line falls from 7 workers per employee in 1950 to 4.8 workers per retiree in 2000 and ends in 2040 with 2 workers per retiree. So my question is, Who's going to fund Social Security as the number of workers retire? With this in mind, it's likely that the government might have to raise taxes or reduce the benefits for individuals that receive Social Security in order to prevent the payments from bankrupting the government. As more and more families consist of single parents that have to juggle the demands of a job and the responsibility of raising your children, and even as recent as the COVID-19 pandemic, where single parents had to work from home and educate their kids, and then, do your regular chores around the house, cook dinner, clean the house. How can managers try to retain and value employees who face these kinds of challenges? Think about that. Some of the things that I've seen our employers do is give the single parents the ability to have a flexible schedule that allows them to potentially work remote, to where they might work a little bit in the morning or a little bit in the afternoon and finish up in the evening after the kids go to bed. That's just some examples on how an employee might be able to help with this kind of a environment. The Gen Z population, which is those born after the mid-90s, will soon be the largest group of consumers in the world, accounting for as much as $143 billion in spending power in the U.S. alone. Designing products and services to meet their broad taste of demographic is critical to the success of many companies. In order to reach these consumers, it's going to be important for companies to market a variety of tools that capture their attention and engage them. And one of those ways is through social media. One of the big ones here recently is TikTok. Take a minute or so to read the slide and consider in business why connecting with Generation Z is important, since a lot of their time is spent online looking at social medias, and how can companies, if they want to reach them, appeal to them. World trade or globalization has grown due to the development of efficient distribution systems and technological advances such as online communication systems. Globalization has greatly improved the living standards around the world, especially in places like China or India. I mean, there was a time where they could not even come close to the U.S. as competitors, and now they have become a major competitor due to the advances in technology and online communications. World trade definitely has its benefits and costs. One of the costs are war and terrorism. War and terrorism have drained trillions of dollars a year from the U.S. economy. Some companies, like those that make bullets, tanks, and uniforms, have really benefited a lot, although others, however, lost workers workers to armed forces and still have grown more slowly as money was diverted to war efforts. The increased unrest in the world adds great uncertainty. This uncertainty is considered by some businesses to be the biggest risk in business. So when you think about risks in business and war and terrorism, think about what's going on between Russia and how with them attacking the Ukraine and how it's causing issues with growing things because Ukraine is one of the biggest exporters with certain kinds of farming chemicals, as well as just gasoline. A lot of places or countries got their gasoline from Russia. And so now with all the sanctions, they aren't able to get gas as freely as they were before, which would cause, increased costs here in the United States with gas. So think about, can terrorism and an economic crisis decrease economic cooperation and free trade among nations? I think it can, just based on the whole Russia-Ukraine issue. So anyway, try to think of other ways that war and terrorism could potentially cause issues. As businesses expand to serve global markets, new jobs will be created for both the manufacturing and services industries. Global trade also means global competition. Rapid changes create a need for continuous learning, so be prepared that as your profession, expands within your career, there'll become a need for more learning. Although climate change is important to be studied and addressed, some of the things that have really caused a lot of focus lately is towards greening, which is the trend towards saving energy and producing products that cost less harm to the environment. That's why you see a lot of the newer products called the Impossible Burger, which they're not using beef anymore from cattle because they figure if they're using more natural products from items that don't take as much out of the environment, like say for instance a lot of cows do, that this could potentially help save the environment. If you have some time while reading the chapter, there is a case in Coca-Cola and how their global offerings are being expanded far beyond soda. So it's interesting because for so many years, Coca-Cola only sold soda, and now they're going beyond that and really looking at juices and coffees and things like that. So take a look at it and see how things have changed throughout the years. All right, it's time for a test prep slide. There's 4 questions on the slide that you can use for preparation. The first one are 4 ways the government can foster entrepreneurship. We talked about allowing for private ownership of businesses, the laws that can be passed in order for a business to write enforceable contracts, establishing currency that can be traded around the world, and then minimizing corruption in business and its own ranks. Next thing to consider is what is the difference between effectiveness, efficiency, and productivity? Effectiveness means producing the desired results. Efficiency means producing goods and services using the least amount of resources. And then productivity is the amount of output you generate given the input, like hours that you work every week. What is empowerment? Empowerment is allowing workers to make decisions essential to producing high quality goods and services. That way you're constantly able to meet the needs of the consumer a little quicker. Last item for test prep is what are some of the major issues affecting the economy today? So those could be technology changes, identity theft, changing demographics, diversity, climate change, war on terrorism, and so on. Just all items to think about when studying for the test. Agriculture was the leading industry in the U.S. in the 1800s. Technology has made farming so efficient, the number of farmers has dropped from about 33% of the population to about 1%. However, it's still a major industry in the U.S. Agriculture is still one of the largest, most important industries in the U.S., mainly because technology has increased productivity, that has allowed for more efficient farming and growth of those farms. Think about how technology could also help smaller farms compete with the larger farms. And just give you a few minutes to think about it before we move on. One last test prep for this chapter. When studying, think about what major factor caused people to move from farming to manufacturing and from manufacturing to the service industry. Um, Really, just talked about in the previous slide is the efficiencies in agriculture. It led to the reduction in farms and growth in industries that caused workers to leave farm for the cities. The growth of efficiencies in production had the same effect in agriculture. As factories became more efficient and technologically driven, workers migrated to that service sector. Last question is, what does the future look like for tomorrow college graduates? You. The information-based global revolution will alter all sections of the economy. So just be aware and keeping your eye out for interesting opportunities as you graduate.